You're listening to The Voluntary Life, where you can hear ideas for finding freedom in an unfree world. Visit thevoluntarylife.com to connect with the show and hear all past episodes. Here's your host, Jake.
Hi, it's Jake here. Welcome to The Voluntary Life. So this is another episode about GTD, getting things done. I have done quite a few episodes in the past about this, so if you've been listening, you probably know the basics of what this approach to personal productivity is, but I will put some links in the show notes so you can get some background on this. And I also hope that even if you're not interested in using the GTD technique yourself, you can adapt some of these ideas and find some use in your own methods of organising your life and getting things done. Just as I have adapted GTD myself, everyone who uses it really adapts it for themselves. So this week I want to talk about the weekly review. And the purpose of this technique or approach is really to get a handle on all your commitments in life so that you can decide what it is that you're doing, that you want to do, and what things you're doing that you don't really want to be doing or aren't serving you. And the weekly review is also what enables you to maintain all your systems in life. And overall, the weekly review, for me, is the most important sort of technique or tool for conscious living, for really being conscious about what it is that you're doing with your life and staying conscious, staying on top of everything. What I love about this approach is that it helps me to make conscious choices about life, to do the things that matter to me, that have meaning, that are important, and to avoid finding myself in situations where I've been just working on stuff that is kind of a waste of time or pointless or not really what I want to be doing in my life. So that's the value I get out of this process. And I think it's really helpful if you're an entrepreneur or running your own business, starting your own business. That's especially the time when, your own systems for managing your time and your productivity are crucial to your success. But this approach is incredibly helpful whatever you're doing for a living. If you're in a job working for somebody else, it's really going to support you in whatever approach you take. So in this episode, I want to talk about one part of the weekly review. The weekly review is actually comprised of three parts. There's what's generally called the Getting Clear review, and that is something that I've already covered in the podcast called Mental Decluttering. That's where you just make sure that you're clear of all of the crap that's built up in your life, and you've got a clear deck to think properly about what it is that you're doing. So have a look at the episode Mental Decluttering if you're interested in that. I'll put a link in the show notes. The second part of the weekly review is the subject of this episode, and that's normally called the Current Review. And it's about making sure that you're current with everything that's happening with your life, with all your commitments. And there is a third part of the weekly review, which is called the Creative Review. And that's where you really, once you've done the clear and current review, you get to really be creative and sort of nurture that side of yourself. And that's a fantastic technique as well. And I probably will cover that in another episode. But this week, we're talking about the current review. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you how I do my own weekly review, how I use these kind of techniques, and whatever you find useful or helpful, by all means adapt or change or adjust to yourself. So the first part of my weekly review is my review of all my areas of responsibility. So the idea here is to take your life and look at all the different areas of responsibility or aspects of your life and have a list of all the aspects of your life that you can use to really organize your thinking about what you're doing with your life, about what your projects are, about where you are at in your life, and what your hopes and dreams and visions are. I have a list of areas of responsibility, and there's about 17 areas on my list, and they range from things like my relationship, my friendships, my financial life, my writing, my IT systems, things I do for fun. These are all sort of important aspects of my life that I don't want to lose sight of, and I also consider to be a kind of area of responsibility or one set of activities in my life. And the idea in GTD is these are all things that you need to do something to maintain. So, for example, Health is another area of responsibility. You got to do stuff to stay healthy. You need to exercise and so forth. And consequently, for any aspect of your life like that, it's worthwhile having a regular review of that aspect of your life and keeping conscious about what you're doing. So that's what I do every week. I look at each area and I use a task management application which organizes all my projects into these different areas. And I also have within Evernote, for each area of my life, I've got an Evernote note with background information and links and so forth. But what I do each week in my review is I go through the list and I look at each area of responsibility and I think about what's going on in this part of my life, whether anything new has come up, whether there's any new projects in this aspect of my life, whether anything has changed, whether there's anything that is now no longer relevant or on hold. And I basically make sure that I've captured all of the projects that I'm currently involved in that part of my life. So, for example, if I'm looking at my writing, then I look at all of the writing projects that I currently am working on, and I think about, is there anything else that I plan to do that I haven't made a project, and so forth. Now, once a month, I also go into Evernote, and I actually look at the Evernote note that I've got about each aspect of my life. So, for example, I have a note about my writing project where I've written down all of the things that are important to me about writing, what I'm trying to get out of it, what my aims are, what my vision is for what I'm trying to achieve and so forth, and links to various project documentation and so forth. And I look through each of those. Oh yeah, and mind maps. There's also I have a lot of mind maps for each of these areas of responsibility that I look at in the Evernote documentation once a month. But on a weekly basis, that's the idea, is to have an overview of each area of life. And I find that enormously helpful in staying conscious. So, for example, if you are really working hard on a project, it's so easy to sort of lose sight of, for example, your health and, what you're doing in that aspect of your life. And by looking at this once a week, you really stay conscious about your whole life in a sort of full 360 view. So that's the first part, areas of responsibility. The next part I look at is my live projects. So live projects are any projects, any goals or things that I want to achieve that contain more than one action. So some of these projects are really small, like just replacing a piece of equipment. If I need to search for prices online and I need to order it and so forth, there may be just 2 or 3 actions involved in that project. Other projects are really big, like publishing my first book, which I've just done, was a big project. And there's a kind of grey area where sometimes from big projects, I create smaller sub-projects individually. So I had a writing the book project, and I had a self-publishing the book project, and now I have a marketing the book project, and so forth. But anyway, the point being, I capture all of my commitments in life in projects, and I capture them with each project having a goal which shows what the end of this project is, what finished means or done means, and then I have actions associated with those projects. So the first thing I do is to look at the whole list of projects. And again, I do this in my task management app, but you can do it on paper or anything else. And I just look at the whole list and I sort the list by various criteria. So for example, I sort the list by urgency or deadline. And that's just for those projects that actually have a specific deadline. If I know that I need to, for example, submit a tax return by a certain date, then that project has a deadline. And so I put the deadline in and I look at what my actual deadlines are. Now, I used to also just give myself deadlines for every project, but I find that I just blow straight past deadlines that aren't real deadlines. So I'm quite cautious about giving myself deadlines, and I give them where they're really warranted, but otherwise they're just live projects. So anyway, I look at the deadlines on projects, and that's one way of sorting them, but I also sort all the projects by importance. And importance for me means, how significant is this going to be to me looking back on this in 20 years' time? Is this really going to make a huge difference to my life? Or is this just one of those things that just needs to get done? And again, this, for me, helps me stay conscious of what really matters to me, what's really important to me. I find it so easy to get bogged down in doing stuff that's just immediate and in front of me and just needs to be done or whatever. I'm really making a conscious effort to know what I want to do in life and what's meaningful, important, impactful for me. And so I sort my projects every week, and I remind myself of what the epic, important things that I'm trying to do are, so that I stay conscious of them. And it re-energizes my commitment to doing them as well. So once I've done that, with looking at the list of projects as a whole, I then go in and I do the actual live project review. And this is quite a lot of hard work each week, but it's really worth it. And the live project review is going through each project, looking at the actions on the project and making sure that I know at a bare minimum what the next action on this project is. So what is the very next thing that needs to get done to be moving this project forward? And it has to be a really specific action. It can't be just like work on something. It needs to be call this person about that subject. Or it needs to be buy this from the shop. Or draft the summary of this idea. Or something like that. So it's got to be like a really specific action that you know when it's done. You know exactly what it's going to be, where you're going to be, how you're going to do it, and you're going to know when it's done. And that's the very bare minimum for every single project. Now, if you know beyond the next action to the next 2, 3, 4 actions, that's great. But at least for every single project, just making sure that I know what the next action is enormously helpful. Because these projects only get done one step at a time. And in order for that to happen, you've got to know what the next step is. So I find it hugely helpful and hugely motivating to know that I can do something to move this forward, even if it's just a small step. The next thing that I do on the weekly review is I look at all my agendas and waiting lists for people. So this is a sort of another way of looking at life. You've got projects, but also within those projects, there are various actions and things that I need to get done that involve other people. I might need to phone a person, or I might need to ask somebody about something, or I might be waiting for something from someone. And within my task management app, I can also link individual tasks to individual people. And what that means is I can look at a summary for each person in my life of all the tasks that are associated with them. So I can see all the calls that I need to make to do with this person, everything I'm waiting for from this person, and so forth. And that is really helpful because it means that if you're going to have a call with someone or a meeting, or if you need to follow up about something, you can be really efficient because you can know that you've got like 6 things that you need to talk to them about, and you can make sure that you hit all those 6 points rather than just phoning them about one thing and then sending them an email about another and so forth. So that's a really useful thing to do. The last thing that I do in the current review is to look at my week ahead plan. And that's 2 things. One is I just make a very brief summary in Evernote. I write down for the week that's gone by, things done and decisions taken. And that's just a very brief bulleted list, the main things that I've done in the previous week and the main decisions that I've taken. And then I write down for the week ahead, things to do and decisions to make. And I find that if I get more complicated than that, I actually don't get more value. This is the most valuable because it's the simplest, is just to keep a really high-level view of the key decisions that I've taken, key things that I've done, and what I need to do and what I need to decide in the week ahead. And then I look at my calendar and I do schedule time. So I do decide what I'm going to do on Monday morning and Tuesday afternoon and et cetera, and any sort of fixed appointments that I've got, just so that I have a plan of what I want to get done in the week ahead. And that is the live review. I personally find it a fantastic way of staying conscious about what I'm doing with my life and making sure that I'm doing things that really bring value and meaning for me. There is another part to my review, which is the creative review, which is where I really look at generating creative new ideas for life. But that's a topic for another podcast. So I hope that you find that useful. Don't forget to check out my new book, Becoming an Entrepreneur, How to Find Freedom and fulfillment as a business owner. You can find a link to the Amazon page on the website, The Voluntary Life, and also don't forget to sign up for my mailing list. I'm going to have a lot more awesome things coming in the near future, and I'm going to keep people informed on the mailing list. So you can find, again, the form on thevoluntarylife.com to fill that in. Thank you so much for listening, and let me know if you have any feedback or thoughts. Love to hear from you.
Thank you for listening to The Voluntary Life. If you have feedback about the show, please email jake@thevoluntarylife.com. If you enjoyed this program, please share the podcast with your friends or click the donate button on thevoluntarylife.com.